afternoon, everyone. My name is Don Parkinson, and I'm a Senior Consultation Specialist with SNC Lavalin. Today, we are continuing our series of live stream topics as our project moves through the federal impact assessment process. The topics we are covering parallel our project activities, so we hope these will help our viewers and listeners better understand the project and provide input along the way. So let's get started. Today, we're going to talk about a specific component of the federal impact assessment process, that being the detailed project description, to help community members get a better understanding of the thinking behind and the activities associated with this component of the federal impact assessment process. So let's do a quick run through now of what we're going to cover today. If we can shift to the next slide. So we're going to talk about the overall federal impact assessment process by talking about the main phases. We're going to talk about the first phase, which is the planning phase. Then we're going to dive into the detailed project description, talk about its general requirements, its key components, and then finish things off with the impact assessment determination that's out of the DPD, or a detailed project description review. So now let's move now to the main phases in the impact assessment process. So we are currently in the planning phase, and I'll get into specifically where we are in this planning phase in a few minutes. After the planning phase, there's the impact statement phase, which is the preparation of that impact statement. Then there's the impact assessment phase, looking at impacts based on the statement. And then the decision-making phase, where IAC, the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, does a review and makes decisions. And then there's a post-decision phase, which is about commitments and monitoring. So let's look at each process phase. Well, let's look at the first process phase, that is, the planning phase. And if we can move to the next slide, please. There's a number of activities in the There's a number of activities in the planning phase. There's the initial project description, which is sort of a lighter version of the detailed project description. It provides sort of a background on the project. And then this initial project description is then circulated publicly to get feedback. And then we'll get into the details associated with that, but then there's a detailed project description, which has, as you can tell by the name, a lot more detail associated with it, more information to help the regulators and IAC do that review and be able to decide whether an impact assessment is required or not. The agency, the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, determines whether that impact assessment is required or not. And if it is, then what's called Tailored Impact Statement Guidelines, or TISG or TISG, are prepared and issued. And what these are, they are basically they represent the work plan, what has to be done as part of the impact assessment. That's what we're talking about. So in the provincial process, you probably remember us talking about the terms of reference, which are actually prepared by the proponent or the initiator of the project. In this case, it's the Federal Impact Assessment Agency of Canada that prepares the TISG, these Tailored Impact Statement Guidelines, that direct the work that's done as part of the impact assessment work. So the detailed project description, the DPD responds to what's called a summary of issues. So a summary of issues is prepared after the initial project description has been submitted. Um, the regulator, IAC, does engagement and consultation with provincial, territorial, and Indigenous jurisdictions, Indigenous groups, the public, federal authorities, and other participants. They do very broad engagement and consultation with these different groups to get feedback on this initial project description. And the DPD is the main basis from which IAC makes a decision as to whether an impact assessment is required, which is why it has to be a very comprehensive document that provides enough detail so that an informed decision can be made. And of course, the DPD helps inform or helps allow the tailored impact statement guidelines to be prepared because it has the details about the project. So IAC reviews the detailed project description to determine if it meets the requirements. It's called a conformity review. And they do this within 10 calendar days of receiving the detailed project description. And then once it's accepted, it's posted on the registry. The registry is like it's a public forum. So the registry is on the website, basically. So we have just, for NRL, the Northern Road Link project, we have just completed the conformity review. The DPD has been accepted, and now it will appear on the registry as well. And then within 10 days, if we can go back one slide, within 10 days, IAC will make meaning another 10 days, IAC will make a determination as to whether an impact assessment is required um, uh, after that. So in terms of general requirements of the detailed project description, uh, it's it has to be an accurate representation of the project. That's kind of an obvious one. But at the time that it's submitted, it has to accurately represent what the project really is. It has to include information related to any option. So if there's options associated, different ways of doing things associated with the the proposed project, information has to be provided about all these different options so that it's all there and available for the regulators to review. Uh, It must include the proponent's responses to the issues raised during any consultation undertaken. So, for example, the summary of issues, uh, the proponent, the project initiator, so that would be Martin Falls and Webequie First Nation, they have to respond to what was the issues raised in the summary of issues, and then those responses are included as well. Uh, the DPD needs to be very detailed for obvious reasons so that they can make an informed decision as to whether an impact assessment is required. Because to make a decision like that, it's not a simple, straightforward decision necessarily. Requires review of a lot of information. Let's move now to the key components of a detailed project description. Some of these may be obvious, but it's important that we go over these. One of them is updates to general information. So if the project name is changed or contact information, that has to be included. The results of the planning phase. So those responses to the summary of issues. And further engagement updates if the proponent or project initiator has had any meetings with indigenous groups, for example, or other groups, they are to report that engagement to show that because it's a reflection of having uh, solicited, tried to get feedback from other groups about the proponent's project. If any information, you need to include any updates on information on the project, such as the project purpose, the need for the project, potential benefits of the project. There has to be very detailed information describing where the project actually is, and these might include site maps or some sort of legal description as to where the lands and waters involved in this, whether there's federal lands involved, indigenous communities, where these indigenous communities are relative to the project. Uh, you have to identify any federal, provincial, territorial, indigenous, or municipal involvement and associated effects, potential effects of the project, and of course a plain language summary that's in both English and French, so that non-technical people can understand the project. So let's move to our next slide here. So in terms of the results of the planning phase, um, this would summarize the results of any additional engagement undertaken, or any engagement undertaken with Indigenous communities or other parties. It would describe how the proponent is going to address the issues that were identified in the summary of issues after the initial project description was reviewed. Um, uh, Description as to how the proponent will address issues that are um, Indigenous related. So these could be potential adverse impacts on Indigenous rights as well too. The need to identify changes made to the initial project description as part of the response to the issues. You have to demonstrate that you are, as the proponent, have responded, and how you responded, and how you adjusted your project description in response to comments that were received as part of the summary of issues. And then identification of any project relevant studies or plans, such as regional or strategic assessments that have been or are being undertaken. So in terms of project information, uh, the kind of information that would be included in a detailed project description would be updated purpose and need for the project, how the details of how the project meets um, the provisions and the schedule for the physical activities uh, regulations, um, descriptions of all activities, temporary or permanent infrastructure and physical works associated with all aspects of the project, not just during its construction, but during its construction and operation as well. And then any specifics associated with that, whether it's the purpose, the size, the capacity, anything that helps IAC better understand the scope or scale of the project. And then, of course, it has to also include a description of any physical activities incidental to the project, like, for example, who is undertaking, and then, like, in doing that, identify who is undertaking activities, the relationship to the proponents, associated federal or provincial regulatory requirements, an estimate of the maximum capacity of the project, or some sort of metric or measure associated with, or measures associated with the project, to give IAC an understanding of what they're dealing with when they look at this project. And of course, a schedule, even if it's a rough schedule, because quite often a detailed schedule can't be known at that point, but an idea just to give the regulators an idea of what kind of timeline and what kind of activities would happen at different points in time. And then potential alternative means of carrying out the project that are actually technically and economically feasible as well too. So that's what they're looking for when it comes to project information. Let's talk a little bit now about the location information and context, and what's expected to be part of a detailed project description in that case. So um, it's expected that there be geographic coordinates of the project and its additional facilities, uh, such as lay down areas, construction camps, storage areas, pits or quarries, access roads to get to those pits or quarries, some sort of description of the boundaries of the study corridor, uh, the consultation area. So, for example, indigenous communities, where are these located? The ones that have to be that are to be consulted with as part of the work. Where are they located relative to the project? Um, Site maps at a scale that allows detail to be revealed. Um, a legal description of the land, identification of which lands are reserve lands and which ones are not, if that applies, lands used for traditional purposes, if there's any information on traditional lands and traditional territories of different First Nations, it's very helpful to have that information available where it is available. Um, Federal lands, physical biological environment, so sort of painting that picture, describing the physical and biological environment with of the area within which the project sits, health, social, and economic context or environment as well too. So a lot of information required to help sort of identify that location and characterize the location of the project. So let's move on now to the next slide, which is federal, provincial, territorial, indigenous, or municipal involvement and effects. So this might include identification of any financial support from federal authorities, uh, identification of federal lands. Another key one is a list of permits, licenses, or other authorizations that might be required by um, and it says here jurisdictions that have powers, duties, or functions in relation to the assessment of the impact on the environment of a project. So this could include many, many different agencies, federal, provincial, in some cases municipal as well too. And then finally, description of any changes to the environment or to health or social or economic conditions that may occur in Canada that are directly linked or are incidental to a federal authority that is responsible for permitting or enabling the project to be carried out. As we move along here, another requirement is to identify potential effects of the project, and then there needs to be a detailed project description summary. So when we talk about potential effects, we're talking about things like description of any changes caused to fish and fish habitat, aquatic species, and migratory birds as a result of doing and carrying out the project. It could be in describe any changes to the environment that may occur on federal lands or other provinces or outside of Canada. Uh, Another one would be description of any impacts on Indigenous people relating to physical cultural heritage, health, social, economic conditions, current land uses for traditional purposes, and then any structure, site, or thing that is important historically, archaeologically, or architecturally as well too. So and then, of course, another key one, especially now, would be an estimate of project greenhouse gas emissions and likely waste and emissions through air, water, land during the different project phases during the construction and operations. And then any associated management plans associated with that. So, and then finally, that plain language detailed project description summary. Uh, It's a very important document. Um, it has to be in plain language so that it can be understood by non-technical people, and it has to be provided in both English and French. So there's a lot of information that goes into a detailed project description, as you can tell. It is not a small document, but it has to be thorough. It has to be comprehensive. It has to provide enough information so that IAC, the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, can make an informed decision about the project as to whether it should go ahead and be permitted. So let's talk now about the impact assessment determination. Um, when we talk about this is the determination as to whether an impact assessment is required, um, and that actual determination is done within 10 calendar days of accepting the detailed project description. And the impact assessment determination is based on a number of factors. Some of these include the initial project description, the detailed project description, and the responses to the summary of issues. It could be based on possibility that the project may cause adverse effects in areas that are in federal areas under federal jurisdiction, or any direct or incidental effects could come from the project. Um, Another factor in the impact assessment determination would be any adverse or negative impact the project might have on the rights of Indigenous people. Any relevant regional or strategic assessments that are being conducted under the Impact Assessment Act. Um, any study that is conducted or planned that is prepared by a jurisdiction in respect of a region that is related to the project and that has been provided by the agency to the agency. Any other relevant factors too. So a number of different factors contribute to that determination as to whether an impact assessment is required. And then IAC will post on the registry a notice of its decision as to whether an IA or impact assessment is required, and the reasons for that decision. So that information is all made public as part of a very transparent process. So I know that's a lot of information in a short span of time, but we hope that was helpful. And if you do have any questions on it, please, we invite you to contact us. You can see the contact information on the screen right now. We have our phone number and our email address. And we definitely encourage you to go to northernroadlink.ca. And we would also very much like to visit your community as well too. So if you would like us to visit your community and give a presentation on this project, we would be happy to do that. We will respect your consultation protocols. Uh, just get in contact with us. The information is on your screen or on the website, and there's the website right there, and we can set something up. We can visit your community in person, or we can make other arrangements, whatever you prefer. So, but we definitely want to be able to do that. And that wraps up today's discussion of the detailed project description, which is a key part of the federal impact assessment process. We hope this was helpful and encourages you to join us again in 2 weeks. We'll be back again soon. Don't forget to keep in touch with our project team members via the contact information available, and again through our website northernroadlink.ca. Miigwech, and make sure to look out for project updates on social media and our website. Take care. See you soon.